Hi, this is the Quilcom Peakyboo, which is a transient shaper made in flowstone. If you're not sure what a transient shaper is, you can check it out on Google and YouTube. There's plenty of information and also importantly information about how you can use such a thing to great effect in your mix. A transient shaper is basically a means of altering the attack sound of a sharp change in level from quiet to loud. Such a thing you would find on drums, percussion instruments of various types, but could also be, for instance, the key click of a Hammond organ or the pluck of a string. So first off, I'm going to run through some presets to show you some examples of what transient shaping sounds like and what the Peakyboo can do for you, and then I'll discuss the operation of the front panel, which is fairly straightforward, and then I'm going to take a few sounds and see what we can do with them. All the presets provided on here are designed to go with the kick and snare sample, which is provided along with a few others in the zip file for the Peakyboo. Okay, so I'll run through the presets, which, as I said, are tuned, if you like, to the kick and snare sample or clip. So the first one is just an init. It sets everything to neutral, no effect, and we can switch between the dry and wet sounds here. So let's get this thing running. Some of these effects are quite subtle, so you may have to listen carefully. Some are not so subtle. Okay. So this will provide a harder initial attack. This takes the attack even higher and harder. Original, processed. We can soften the initial attack. Or soften it even more. If you listen to the kick there, it's quite a delicate thud. We can shorten the attack by reducing the sustain part of the transient. We'll shorten it even further. So we really just get that initial punch. We can suppress the original attack and expand the sustained part, which I tend to think is the decay part, but you'll find it called sustain very often on other people's products. Now, without using compression of any sort, we can get a sort of louder type of sound. All these presets are level corrected, so when you switch between dry and wet you get a very similar overall loudness effect. And this one is just focusing on the kick, which we can do with the Peakyboo. So if you listen to the snare, it's the same, but the kick changes. here I've increased the initial hit, the transient, and then brought up a delay which increases the room sound, which gives a kind of an echo. Let's try. Wet. One of my favourites is to make the whole thing sound reversed. And again, without using any sort of compression, we can create a gated effect, short or long. It's a longer version. And of course we can do creative things like giving a late boost to the room sound. Original. That's the process sound. Okay. Now some bits about the operation of the front panel. I should say that the Peakyboo is stereo, it can process a stereo track, but that the side chain is in mono. This avoids left-right shifts in the stereo field for different transients. So that is the broad function of the signal path. There are two essential types of transient shaper. One is level independent, so it doesn't matter whether it's a quiet signal or a louder signal or a big transient or a small transient, you will still get the same processing. This is selected here. If you select triggered, then this area comes into play. Normally it's grayed out if you've got level independent. Triggered. Okay, so triggered above a certain threshold will actually make an envelope that is much more controllable than with the level independent one, and is smooth in its change of amplitude control. The level independent one, which is probably the one to start off with for most applications, has the slight disadvantage of having a little bit of ripple on the side chain, so it can introduce a small amount of distortion as it modulates the amplitude. So you've got to choose really which is the most suitable for your source material and what you'd like to achieve. So now a little bit about the scope here. Let's start this playing. So the white signal is the incoming signal amplitude from the side chain, and we should aim to set a level with the input to keep the peaks on the screen. It's the best way to do it. You don't have to. You can overdrive it if you wish, but that's probably the best way to use it. Now the red trace is the actual control signal, the sidechain output, if you like, which goes to the voltage controlled amplifiers that determine the signal output. So if I now turn up the attack knob, then you'll see I'm just processing the attack, or I can reduce the attack. Similarly with the sustain or decay portion, I can increase the sustain. reduce the sustain. Now if I reduce the sustain, you'll see that the overall control signal level has dropped. We can increase that. Okay. By switching between dry and wet, we can get a match of the levels. So the wet is too loud there. We can also set the output level here and watch for clipping on this output level meter there. Okay, so we have a saturation circuit here. If we bring this in, we can really drive that hard if we wish. Bring the output level down. We get a sort of crunch on the bass drum there on the kick. Okay, so this section here on the left is the sidechain filter, which means that we can derive our sidechain control from an area of the spectrum to suit which part of the signal we want to process. So if we turn the sidechain filter on, how do we know what we're doing? Well, we can listen to it. We can just focus on the bass drum, or the radio anywhere we want. If we go really high, you'll see that the level here drops, so we can bring the level up to get it something like full screen again. So everything is working nicely. Okay, let's turn that off now. Okay, so now then, it's the triggered stuff. Now, for triggered, as I mentioned earlier, we do that, and we can start our drum going, and this is the trigger threshold. Set a level to suit your source material. Doesn't matter so much if we get peaking on this, but we can reduce the level a little bit. This is the envelope generator section, all of this. And this little graphic here shows the relative shape of the settings that you've made here. So we can have a hold period if we want to. Or just have a attack and decay, or attack, hold and decay. But this graphic doesn't show the overall time. There's no graphic for this because this is the sustain tail, which is actually you could think of as positive going, and the sustain tail starts at the end of the attack plus the hold period. So let's see what we can do with this. Let's turn up the sustain part. So you can see the sustain shape there. We can shorten that. And by increasing the hold time, we can make that sustain occur or start at a different phase of the waveform. So let's have a look at the attack section. This is the attack time. Normally you would probably want to leave that to 0, but to 1 millisecond, but if you do that increase, you'll see the shape changing. Control click, which is what I just did, resets these, all of them to their default values, which I decided upon. Let's add a little bit of a hold to that to see what happens to the shape. Let's have a sudden cut off. Let's try and invert that. Now you're getting some idea of how I created some of the presets. So essentially, just to recap, this AHD envelope generator operates on this attack control, and the sustain tail or decay tail, whatever you want to call it, is controlled by this knob. So you set the value here and then decide what you want to do with that here. Some strange things are possible. Another feature of the Peekyboo which make them useful is this dry wet switch, but also we can have a proportional amount. When we operate this switch, it switches from one to the other, wet and dry, but we can go anywhere in between. So if we set up an extreme sound like this one, we can then bring in the mix of the original sound. Find a nice balance between the processed and unprocessed sound, which are mixed together in the proportion that you wish. This is an application for bass to control the initial attack, the pluck of the bass string. If I just set this going dry mode. Bringing out the initial stab. Or we can soften that initial. And we also could make it softer at the start. Give it more of a plucked sound. This is the Peekyboo operating on a guitar track. Let's soften that initial pluck. Harsher. So it's a fairly subtle effect, but we can bring the guitar sound a little bit forward or backwards into the mix. Okay, this next one is a drum kit recorded dry. it a bit more attack. Soften it a bit. Mess around with the sustain. See if we can get it to just respond. To the hi-hat. Oh, we're bringing out the hi-hat only. We'll soften the hi-hat. You can use a transient shaper, as I mentioned earlier, to process the initial click of a Hammond organ. So if I stop that playing. And soften it a little bit. Or harden it a little bit. Quite a subtle effect, but it may be useful. Okay, this is a fairly busy little clip. Let's see what changes we can make. Quite a good range there. Yeah, good control range on that, I think. Okay, here I've got loaded up a little clip of Fender Rhodes type sound, and I've set this so that it will soften the sound to take away some of that initial ring. Here we go, this is the dry. That's the process sound. Okay, this one is a long synth kick, so let's have a listen to that and I'll show you what you can do with this kind of waveform. I'm using the trigger control here. It's a nice simple one to trigger from, very reliable. Give it more punch. Just extract the bass part. And we can control the hold time. That's a good range of effect we can place on that sort of signal. And finally, some synth stabs where we can alter the balance between the initial live sound and the reverberation that follows it. So this is set up to amplify the sustain phase. So let's listen to this. This is the dry one, and then I'll gradually increase the wet one. So there you go. Good range of possibilities, fun to play around with, I hope.